Do you know that yesterday was the feast of Columkill? And I was in Galway. I had an appointment with the eye doctor, Mr. Frank Kinsella, in the Galway clinic. And I've been suffering with this problem, a detached retina, since January. And it's been a long process. Operation, then there was cataracts. I couldn't see out of it for 3 months. Then it's the slow process of healing and him looking at it every few weeks and us worried about whether it's going to heal or not. And eventually you come to a day where he looks at it and he says, it's very, very good. All is done. I don't have perfect eyesight in that eye yet, but he says that should come back in the next 2 years. That's okay. I can see fine. And I drove away and I was so happy. I was so relieved. I mean, I think I felt physically better. You can get healed because you're half healed. If you feel good in yourself, you feel so relaxed because the doctor has told you some good news, it almost improves you or accelerates your improvement in other areas. That would be my theory. And I drove back from Galway to Donegal, long journey, 3.5, 4 hours. And I got up this morning and I'm just really energized because I got a good result. I haven't got a good result in the health stories for years. It's been one thing after another. And I had such an experience of getting one illness and then another illness, and I began to feel like there's a lesson in this. I began to feel I had to let go of my emotional sense of catastrophe. That was the first. I remember the first time I got ill in 2011. It's 11 years ago, and I got colitis. Well, I was not dealing with it well, I was so stressed. I was so depressed. I was so anxious. I panicked. This can't be happening to me. And all that stress, I believe, led me into depression. Because it felt like I was in a room, let's say, I was in a room with just myself. And sometimes I used to feel I was abandoned by other people. I couldn't tell you who, but I'd just be lying there in a bed feeling, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here on my own. And it'd be like, if you ever tried to tie down your cat in a bag in order to get your cat into the cat cage to bring it in the back of the car to the vet. And all the way into the vet, the cat is just like scraping at the edges and pulling the bag off and just making awful sounds because it's in a place that it's not happy and it will do anything to get out of it. And that's how I felt initially when I got ill. Like being in a room that you don't want to be in. Like your conscious mind is a room and you don't want to be in it. And it feels like you're in there on your own. And that's how it felt for me. So the first thing I did, in fact, I was sent to the therapist. People said, try the therapy. And I did. I went to a therapist and she was very good. She was very helpful. And I knew a lot of the stuff. I had practiced mindfulness before and I was meditating for years as somebody who was practicing Tibetan Buddhism, and that was okay. But she contextualized it in a secular way, just to feel good, not be feeling panicky, and trying to find out where the panic was coming from. For example, like what happened in my childhood that I felt abandoned. I remember one time when I was a kid, I was going to confession, and I went into the dark box. No, this was actually, as far as I remember, the time when you're practicing confession. Where they bring young children. This is in the old days, to bring the young children to the church for the first confession, and they all practice it. And you go into this dark little cubicle, and there's a little grill opens in front of you, and you see the priest at the other side of the grill, and you tell him your sins. You confess your sins, and he forgives you. He doesn't forgive you, but he embodies the blessing of the church, whereby Christ forgives you. Or where the church forgives you, I think, to be quite precise. Anyway, there we were practicing, and my turn came to get into the little cubicle, and when I had the door closed, the light came on. It was coming through the grill from where he was, and I said all the things that you're supposed to say. I told lies, and I robbed sweets, and I'm sorry for all that. And then he did his bit, and did the blessing, and then said, for your penance, say 3 Hail Marys. And then he closed the grill, the shutter that was on the grill, and I ended up in there in the dark. So I went to open the door. I couldn't find the handle. I was probably on the wrong wall, if you get me. I couldn't find the handle for the door, and instantly something in my brain clicked into panic. I felt, they've taken away the handle on the door. They've locked me in here. I'll never get out of here for the rest of eternity. That's what I felt. In a second, I was 7 years of age. And I tell you, a cat that you would trap in a little cat cage wouldn't create as much noise and trouble and panic as I did. Or a bird, the way if a bird got caught in a room and you try and get it out, and as you go closer to the bird to catch it so that you can put it out, the bird goes crazy. Well, that's the level of craziness that I was at in that little confession box. I was terrified. And it seemed like nobody was coming to my assistance. Maybe there was 5 seconds or 10 seconds passed. Or maybe there was half a minute passed, I don't know. But at the time, it felt like a couple of hours that I was in there, getting more and more stressed. And at one stage, I think I had climbed up onto the ledge, beside where the grill was, where the child would be kneeling, facing into the grill. There was a little ledge there for your elbows. I had climbed up on that with some notion that maybe the handle of the door was higher up than I realised. And then when I got up on it, I fell off it. And the clatter I made on the floor and me head hitting the wall as I fell off it alerted people outside, and they rushed to open the door, and the priest rushed out. And there I was, shivering like in shock. And I remember it as well. Not only did it feel like a long time when it was happening, but I remember it in detail for years. It's like a dream that never goes away. And that was just a trauma in youth, and behind that trauma there must have been something deeper that I've never ever put my finger on. That something happened to me, and in many respects I'd be afraid to find out, because it could be quite traumatic. I might have to go back to the therapist for another 6 months. But all I remember is that moment of kind of shock and horror. And there was a thing happened years later, and I was living in Mullingar, and the child was in school. She was in secondary school, maybe the first year of secondary school, and I was in Mullingar, had an apartment I used to write in. It was a small little apartment now, and I was paying a lot of money for it, all the rent in it. And she'd come in. She was close enough so she was able to walk home from the secondary school, and that was grand. She'd come in about 4:30. So there was about Well, at 1:30 in the day, I decided to have a shower. And I went into the shower and enjoyed myself in the shower, very good shower. And I came out then, and I noticed the door was closed. Obviously, I'd closed the door. I mean, I didn't lock the door, but you automatically close the bathroom door when you're in the shower. And I didn't have my clothes with me, so wrapped up in the towel coming out of the shower, I went to go into the bedroom. And I pulled the handle off the door. And that was the end of it. I couldn't open the door. It wasn't locked, but the clip was on the closed position, and there was no way that was going to open without something to grip the handle. And there was nothing in the bathroom that I could use. And I looked in various drawers again and again, magical thinking, hoping that I'd find a kind of a pliers or something that would grip the door. And the only thing I could find was a scissors, and I tried using the scissors as if that was going to turn the bolt. And of course the only thing it did was it slipped the bolt out the other side. So I could hear the handle and the bolt falling off on the other side. Now I was absolutely, completely locked in. There was no getting out of this. Now, I think what you might call a normal person would sit and wait, and after about, that was only about 2:30, because I had been listening in the bedroom to the radio on my phone. The mistake was I didn't bring the phone into the bathroom, because then I could ring somebody. And it seems a short distance from the bathroom to the bedroom. And yet that phone could be 1,000,000 miles away. I couldn't get at it. And this would just be dawning on you slowly, that I'm caught in this room. And all the complicated things you wanted to do, like go to the local shop and buy some food and put on the dinner for the child when she comes in, and listen to the rest of Joe Duffy. Nothing can be done, because you're caught in the bathroom. You're locked in the bathroom. You can't get out of the bathroom. And I had no clothes on me. I had absolutely nothing but the towel. And I started thinking very irrational thoughts, like maybe there's no oxygen in here, and maybe I'd have a lack of oxygen and it would affect my brain. And then I was beginning to think maybe it'd get cold and I wouldn't be able to keep warm with the damp towel, because the towel was damp because I had been drying myself. And I was getting more and more panicked. And I was wondering, what'll happen when the child comes home from school? Well, what's going to happen is she'll come to the bottom door because she doesn't have a key. Just these coincidences. Do you know the way the ducks are lined up all together in the one direction? To use that image for things going right, for good luck. But sometimes the ducks are lined up, all of them lined up in the wrong direction. And so I realised the child doesn't have a key. I keep telling her, bring the key. We'll have to get you your own key. She doesn't take it. And that means that there's the key that brings you into the apartment, but there's also the separate key for downstairs, outside the door. And that's down a long stairs, and there's no way that my voice, if I was screaming and roaring in the bathroom, there's no way that she would hear me outside on the street. So, as normal, she'd probably ring the bell, and she wouldn't get an answer, and she'd ring it twice, and she'd ring it 3 times, and after 3 times she'd say, he must be out. He must have gone for a walk. And so she'd go round the corner to the hairdresser, the mammy of her best friend at the time, and a lovely woman. We were all great friends. And she'd do what she would often do, and that is go round there and pass the time with the hairdresser, enjoying the crack and doing her homework. So then it would be about 6 o'clock. And by the time she came back, maybe with Magella to see that, I shouldn't have said the name, but anyway, Magella's the hairdresser. So she'd come back and they'd be checking the door, and then they'd be thinking, I wonder where is he? And they might even go to the guards after another few hours. But it could be the following day before they would think maybe he's inside in the apartment, maybe we should get the landlord or the guards to break open the door. And then and only then would I be found naked in the bathroom. And what would I be like if I was alive? Or maybe I'd get a heart attack out of stress. Or how cold could you get in the middle of the night with no clothes on? And there was nobody else in the town of Mullingar that was going to knock on that door. And even if they did, they were knocking on the door outside, down on the street. Isn't it funny how a simple thing can happen? I'm just having a quiet afternoon. I'm going to organise the dinner for the child. I'm listening to the radio. I'll have a shower, be nice and fresh, and suddenly your world is turned upside down. Well, I got into such a panic. I got in such a terrified panic. I didn't know what to do. And there was a plastic, the only instrument that was in the bathroom was a plastic mop. Like there was a plastic handle, a very light plastic handle on this mop. And you could see from the top of it that it was only made of it was a very thin cylinder of plastic, so that you could break it nearly with your hands. And I thought, that's my only chance to break through the door. I didn't know what the door was made of. Maybe the door could have been made of very, very firm wood, and if that was the case, I had no chance of getting out. But I said to myself, they're making doors nowadays that are very cheap. You know, this MDF stuff, and they're only like what you'd put eggs in, you know, a carton for eggs. So I got the handle of this mop, and I said to myself, I have one chance with this now, you know, to go at it like a lance, to go at it like an old knight, you know, and go straight at the door and just really push through. But I've only one chance, because I'd say the thing will break. And I did it just once, and it went through. It went right through the door. I took off the rubber at the start. Do you know the rubber on the top of it? So it's a cylinder, but the top of it would be a little black bit of rubber. And when I took that off, the cylinder, the top of the cylinder was kind of sharp, you know, and I knew that could go through the door. And it did. Well, that in itself was such a relief. I could look out with my eye into the corridor. I'm a grown man, I'm in my 50s at the time. I'm renting an apartment. There's nothing dangerous about living in Mullingar, and yet here I am, looking through a little hole. And I'm still looking at the corridor, and I'm still looking at the door to the sitting room as if it was 1,000,000 miles away. And I was in some kind of crazy prison. Okay. I got my finger into that door, and it did indeed prove to be MDF, and I pulled little bits of it off and off. And after a while, my nails were nearly, you know, starting to bleed. But I could now get about 3 or 4 fingers in. And when I get 3 or 4 fingers in, I could get a grip like with my fist. And now I could pull even a bigger bit off. And I was telling myself, at least I have oxygen now. And then I got bigger bits and bigger bits. And eventually, I had enough. I had a hole in the door big enough to climb out. Well, I climbed out of that bathroom and I went in. I was still naked. I went in and I lay on the bed. I said, I'll phone somebody. But I had to wait for about 10 minutes because my heart was palpitating. I was in such stress. And it went back to that memory of being in the confession box. And I thought, there's something terrible in my life or in my childhood. There's something like back there that makes me feel isolated and panic. I mean, I got out of the bathroom and I needed to get out of it. I mean, I did what was right, it seems to me, even though when somebody came in to change the door, they had some big laugh at me and they said, holy God, Michael, like, what did you do here? Right? If you saw the hole, it'd be like a comedy, like a Charlie Chaplin comedy movie with the big hole in the bathroom door. But there was no other way out. I mean, you know, to sit in there passively would have been to create a greater mystery and maybe a greater stress to everybody else. And a greater a humiliation to me that would have been monumental. You know, you can imagine the guards at the door breaking it down and finding me inside in the bathroom with no clothes on me. So I think I behaved wisely in breaking down the door, but what alarmed me was the amount of panic that I felt being trapped in there, and also how it brought me back to the other memory, the memory of when I was a child in the confession box. And those two things made me think there is something down there in my memory, buried, that makes me panic and that I don't understand. And the obvious one would be, you know, maybe you were abused in some terrible way that you have, you know, suppressed so you can't even remember it. And I don't think that's the case. Now, I remember meeting one time a woman that worked in our house when I was a baby. She was a nurse. Mrs. Jenkins was her name. And lovely woman. And she remembered when I was a tiny little baby of a couple of months old. And she worked in the house until maybe I was 2 or 3 or 4, I don't know. But she said sometimes when she'd be working there at night and, you know, the mother and father would be away doing something at a kind of to be out at a dinner dance or something. And she said she'd be in minding me. I used to always look for a little bit of food, like a little bit of bread at night, you know, after I had been put to sleep, and I'd wake up then about 11 o'clock or something and I'd be crying for bread. And that the mother said to this nurse, don't be giving it to him. But she used to always bring me up the bit of bread. Now, I believe that my passion for currants in bread, which you can get in Ireland, or in scones, or indeed currants in anything, my belief is that it goes back to that moment. When that maid, nurse, domestic, home help, whatever you want, would come up and give me a little scone or whatever with currants in it, and I would take out the currants and eat them because she told me that. Sometimes, you know, I'd be desperate crying for a bit of bread. She'd send it up, she'd bring it up to me, and then she'd leave it with me, and then it'd still be there the following morning or when she ever came back, but the currants would be picked out of it. Those funny things happened in the old days. Like, you'd ask yourself, would you really leave a lump of bread with a child, you know? I don't know, maybe I was 4 or 5 at that stage. But that's the story she told, and it seemed to me that was connected. And the fact that my mother said to that woman, don't give him anything. My mother was coming from that, more disciplined way of minding children, like, let them cry. So I was upstairs, away from everybody, like in a corner box room of the house, at the end of the corridor, crying for bread, but really crying for company, and not getting it. And that awakened something in me. Some unease about being alone and being abandoned. That emerged when I was in a confession box for the first time. And it erupted like a volcano of panic and terror when I found myself caught in a bathroom in Mullingar with no key. And the way that my psyche was constituted through those developing moments of panic, I believe, is where I get my faith. I think that my faith is to do with human things. I don't, Dawkins talks about everything happening from the top down, that's ridiculous. Okay? The idea that you kind of imagine some sort of God, some sort of old wise man, and he's sort of twiddling with the knobs of the universe before it begins, and then it starts, and then he pulls back and lets it move on, and then he intervenes and interferes. That's the God that Dawkins says is a delusion, and all I can say is, of course it's a delusion. So that's a ridiculous notion of Christian faith. But at the same time, for me, I think the moment of isolation as a child must have been the notion where I constructed God. Not as a top-down, but as a bottom-up. In other words, out of the experience, the human experience of isolation, I constructed a mythic figure, a God. And that would suit Dawkins. He would agree with that. He would say, well, there you go. He would say that, therefore I'm proving that he's right, that God is a delusion. Well, the God of, the top down is a delusion. But the fact that I can understand my faith arises out of human experience doesn't mean that God is any less real for me. I needed a friend in the dark because I was alone. I constructed a friend. The God who is, the Almighty God. Sometimes it was the Virgin Mary, the Mother of God. Sometimes it was a saint. But my faith allowed me to construct, in times of need, in times of anxiety, in times of isolation, a sense of somebody minding me. Because nobody came with the bread, because I felt abandoned, isolated, I also had to construct, in some way I had to imagine, construct, construe that there is another person here in this dark loneliness with me, and that it is a person who loves me. So we construct for ourselves the one who loves us. And that's faith. To trust that, even though you're constructing it, even though I'm putting this together myself, I'm doing this because I'm panicking. And yet you construct God, someone who loves you. Do you know that I wish I had someone to love me? That's it. It's not that, Dawkins talks about the God of the gaps, that we use God to fill in what we don't know. That's rubbish. There's loads of things I don't know about astrophysics. But they're not the places where I find God. And, I don't be saying, oh, well, it must be God, like, I don't understand how the cosmos is fine-tuned or why the speed of light is what it is. Oh, well, it must be God set it at that speed. No, I don't do that. I construct God out of the ground up, out of my need for God. But what I'm saying is that is the human way that I begin to articulate a concept of God, but it doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. Oh, he doesn't exist because you constructed him. No, the two things can happen at the same time. I can be lonely in a room on my own, terrified, and need company and need somebody to love me. And so I can construct the possibility that Dominic Savio or Padre Pio or Teresa of Avila or the Mother of Jesus is there putting their arms around me. I can construct that out of my terror. And then I feel comforted because I feel I'm in the arms of Jesus. Oh, so therefore there's no God. No, it's simply the way that it is revealed to me. That's the way it happens. That's the way I awaken. Thomas Aquinas had a big word for this. He talked about it as concursus. Concursus is a huge word, and like an important word. It's like the course, the course, that two things are happening together, concursus. And what's happening is that the ordinary life of the universe is happening and the life of God is happening, that they're not different, they're not separate. It's the same idea you get in Islam, that there is nothing but God. And it's the same as I think I quoted some fella earlier, saying that there's no dead matter in Christian faith. There's no dead matter. Everything, like the wall, the panels of wood on the wall in front of me are alive. Everything is the manifestation of God. The surface music of some depth, and the depth of being is God. So everything is happening in the one moment, and therefore, if I construct God from the bottom up, if I find myself alone and nervous in a room, and there's a logic to that, and if the logic is that I kind of unconsciously create a friend, a mentor, a deity that puts their arms around me and loves me and holds me, then that is the way it happens humanly. That's the way my mind works. But because that's happening in my mind doesn't mean that there's no God, doesn't mean that it's fabricated. It simply means that my mind awakening in terror and finding the need for God in terror. Same way as there are no atheists in the bunker during a war, as they say. Just the necessity of belief for human reasons. There's a human reason why we need belief. I don't want to be in a room on my own, alone, terrified. So I construct God. That doesn't diminish the possibility of God's presence. It simply means that it's one with my life. It's like it's not separate from my life. He's not outside the door, knocking on it, saying, "Hello, this is me. Can I come through your universe and say hello to you?" No. It is the universe. God is the universe. God, and my mind is the universe, and the necessities of my mind, not just my evolutionary position after millions of years, just being here as an evolved monkey, but also the fact that in every little moment of my childhood, I created things that clicked in a sense of consciousness, and that it woke up gradually as I came to the age of 7 and the age of 14, and I became more aware, more awake. All this in itself is God. It's not It's not like, well, if this process of awakening in your mind constructs the idea of God, therefore there's no God. No, it's the opposite. It's simply that the mystery of God's presence is so much everywhere. That God's presence is in the flower, it's in the mountain, it's in the stream, it's in the eyes of your beloved. It's in your own heart. It's everywhere. And so it's in your darkness as well, in the times that you're worried, in the times that you're lonely, in the times that you're depressed. This is God. The desert monks had a great way of thinking about this, in relation to temptation. Supposing they were trying to meditate and they would use fasting as a form of sort of resisting food so that your mind focused more and more on a singularity, and they'd be working at that. And then maybe to feel tempted, to give in, to stop and go and have a sandwich, right? And maybe sometimes there'd be a party outside. Maybe all the other monks are having a whole lot of sandwiches and lemonade in the cell next door, and he can hear them. And it's really testing his ability. So the monks would say that was actually God who put the other monks there with their sandwiches just to test him further. So God becomes like a coach, training you. I think it's some Asian philosopher said, if it doesn't kill you, it'll improve you. Same idea. That in the difficult things that happen to us, we can see them as the directions of a coach who's training us to be stronger. Or in those moments of solitude when we feel abandoned and panicked and desperately afraid. In that very darkness, God is speaking to us to reassure us that even in this darkness, He is there. We are not alone. And that's what happens, I suppose, in the journey towards death. That when we get to my age, 68 years of age, and you have an illness, and then you have another illness, and then you realize, this is going to go on like this. There's going to be, my hands will be more fragile. If I feel weak now, recovering from an illness, I'm going to feel worse in 5 years' time because I'll be older, and that's where it's going. And this is where I really need my faith. This is where I really need God. And I've no doubt that, the God in the confession box, I did not know. I did not know that my panic in the darkness in that moment was actually the first touching, the first intimacy of God saying, you're going to experience darkness, and you're going to realize that I am with you. And when I was in the bathroom in Mullingar, the same thing was happening. I was experiencing a flash of panic and anxiety about my fragility. And I wasn't yet understanding that in this darkness, in this woundedness, in this vulnerability, there is a presence like somebody putting their arms around me. But it was shortly after that experience in Mullingar that I began to return to the Christian icons of compassion and love simply because I found them consoling. And that happened when I got ill in 2011. And I found rather than be there all unhappy in the bed and getting depressed and not able to come out of the room and keeping the curtains closed and being so alone, even though there were people around me who were loving me and minding me, and yet feeling, oh, but I'm alone because I'm alone in this illness. So you can have people around you who are close to you, and yet you can feel that you're still alone in a room, trapped in a dark space, because of the illness. I'd be lying in the bed and my beloved or children or different people would be in the room sitting at the window or sitting in different places at the door, and they'd be sitting there chatting to you, and yet we were not in the same room. I was in one room. Psychologically, emotionally, they were in a different space, even though we were sharing the same reality of space. And I was in a room that nobody was in it with me, and that's how illness can feel. And rather than feel you want to scream in that room, rather than, and panic like the cat, or panic like the child in a confession box, or panic like somebody stuck in a bathroom, rather than be there, it began to dawn on me that I need something here more than therapy. I need something here more than anything a psychotherapist can give me. I need a sense of faith. And so I would get an icon of the Mother of Jesus, the Mother of God, and I would look at it, and I would feel consoled. And that happened accidentally when somebody gave me the icon. Somebody gave me an icon, 2016. Now, I got over colitis, but I was still having problems. Physical problems, health problems, aging problems, and the panic of being isolated in a dark room from childhood had been triggered by the illness, had created in me a kind of an ongoing depression. And it was still there. And then somebody hands me an icon. And I say, okay, I'm going to use this like I'm going to use it to suit myself. I'm going to think my way, feel my way, weep my way into Christian faith. Imagining the Mother of God as the beautiful, eternal, feminine mother that minds you and loves you. And I did that, and then gradually that became the template of consolation. And through the illnesses, through all the illnesses of the past 4 or 5 years, 1 heart attack, 3 operations, and nearly losing an eye, nearly losing my legs. All miracles that I didn't, but in them I found that I was using Christian icons for my own benefit. Like I might use tablets, like I might use therapy. I was using them for my own benefit to feel better. Nothing to do with morality, nothing to do with like some high-minded notion of going to church. I don't go to church. I was just using this stuff to dialogue in my psyche and feel that if I opened my heart in prayer, it was like having a conversation. So even no matter how much alone you were then, you always had someone to talk to. You could talk to Jesus, or you could talk to Mary, or you could talk to whoever you were imagining. Now, here's the point about Dawkins. Dawkins would say, there you go, you see, you're only constructing that psychologically out of your mind because you're feeling anxious in the dark. That's all you're doing. No God. Point proven. And I'd say, why does that prove the point? Because you think God is some sort of fella twiddling the dials before the universe begins. Big grey beard, and he's there twiddling the dials, and he creates the universe, and then he pops in and out every so often. That's what you think is God? From the top down? And that if we find that the universe just creates itself from the bottom up, one cell at a time, becoming more and more complex over millions, 13 billion years, you think because it comes up out of the ground that it's not God? And you think that if I come up out of the ground in my isolation and I awake as a human being with consciousness that is isolated and feels lonely, feels like I'm trapped in a room, and then I begin to construct the mother of Jesus as the kind, eternal, merciful mother, and I do that because I need it, because I'm lonely, because I want to feel consolation. You think because I do that, that's not God? That's where Dawkins is missing the point. All our humanity is divinity. All our wounds, all our fears, all our brokenness are the very places where the light comes in. Per tenebras ad lucem. Through that darkness, we come to the light. In that darkness, we come to the light. And now I'm so grateful for the faith as it emerged in me over the past 4 or 5 years. And it's the only reason I'm doing these podcasts, is to share that sense of joy with you, that it might be available to you, that you might construct and choose and put together a sense of a mentor deity, a being who loves you, cherishes you, forgives you, and is with you, especially when you're alone in a dark room. And that you would experience the faith in that as God. That the ontological notion of a transcendent God, the ground of all being, is not undermined because you go that path of choosing to create a God for yourself. In fact, that is God. Everything in you is God. And all the ways that you flourish and evolve, and even all the ways that you cope with anxiety, the ways that you cope, it's not that God is protecting you from anxiety. He's in the anxiety. He's in the darkness. He's in the sickness. He is in the death. This journey that we make as humans is a journey to the light by diving deep into the darkness, but knowing that you're not alone. Thank you for being here. I hope that the column which I did for the Irish Times last Wednesday, and I'm going to read now, I hope it makes sense, because that's the energy that it came out of. Thank you. I'm going to make an attempt at something to do with writing and storytelling this week. And I will use one of the columns that I wrote, because I started back in the Irish Times 2 weeks ago on the 1st of June, and I just love doing them columns. And I love the fact that in all the newspaper, they're probably the only ones that really try and be storytelling. There are some people who write in the newspapers and they kind of recount their own life, but the conclusion is always, in some sense, to make some political point or some social point, or, you know, to convey some view about the world as we know it. And I try to write stories in the newspaper that have no point at all except within themselves. So it's like going into a complete universe, separate from the ordinary universe we live in, and I think that's the way of looking at stories. And how do I begin them? How do I make a column for the newspaper? I'm just going to read you one and then we talk about it. Okay. Last year I was in Beaumont recovering from an operation. I lay in bed with 30 staples along my spine, and I was so proud of them that I took a photograph of a mirror in the hospital. If the illness arose as a subject of conversation in the future, I would have an image with which to impress my listeners. The custom of brandishing scars at a dinner table was widespread in the Cavan of my childhood. I often saw men opening their shirts to display the white line of the knife along their rib cage after open heart surgery, as if they were displaying All-Ireland medals. My little staples were not so dramatic. They looked more like a zip or sleepers for a tiny train. But at least I had a few colourful details about the operation to spice up any narrative. For example, someone attached cod liver oil capsules to my spine with a strip of adhesive tape before the operation. They x-rayed me with the capsules in place so that the doctors would have a precise map of my spine to work from when they cut the flesh. When I emerged from hospital, I wasn't in a mood for visitors. I moped around the garden, lingered in the bedroom, or lay on the sofa as a stream of Netflix movies assaulted my tranquility. And when I tried to get up from the sofa, it was almost impossible. That's when I remembered the walking stick. It was in my office for years. The shaft was made from blackthorn, and the handle was crafted from the jawbone of a goat. It was a gift, and I used it once in a theatre show in which I played an old man recounting a tragic tale, and the stick gave me a kind of authenticity on stage that the drama required. But I never used it in real life. It was a theatrical prop, and it ended up hanging on the wall just beside the bookcase, where I keep my religious icons. And sometimes it too acquired the air of a sacred object. Walking sticks demanded my attention as a child. My granny had one, and a blind man who lived next door to her on Bridge Street had another one. He would sit in the sun with a handkerchief on his bald head and his knuckles wound around the top of his stick. In fact, I can't remember any old people who didn't have walking sticks in those days. It's amazing how hip replacements can transform the world. As a child I was brought to knock on several occasions, and sometimes to holy wells. Meandering through the crowds, I couldn't avoid the panoply of crude walking aids and crutches hanging from ledges or fastened to various walls. Free floating canes and crutches proclaiming that some miracle had happened there. Some wondrous cure had been obtained at the gable of that particular church or this particular well. I imagined the afflicted pilgrims being healed so dramatically that they just flung the crutches away from them. But I would have been terrified to touch a crutch or prosthetic limb. I had a vague notion that the disease of the pilgrim might remain in the crutch after the pilgrim had been cured. the stick or walking aid embodied pain, and if I dared to touch it, some mysterious disease might flow down the shaft into my body. Such was my limited grasp of science. But that's the way fear and awe operate. I had no language to contain the reality of suffering, so I could only construct meaning from symbols. Illness was about touch and sensation and objects that carried fearful magic. Like wands, the wands of wizards, or the crooks of the white-haired bishop, or the stick of the blind man who used to use it to beat out time when he lilted a jig. When I got through the operation, people said I was lucky. But that's not what I saw. There was nothing lucky about the doctors and nurses in Beaumont. Their healing power was transmitted to me through touch and sensation, and afterwards the walking stick became a symbol of that grace. I felt not lucky, but grateful. After a while, I could rise from the sofa like a lark from its boggy nest, and the stick returned to the wall beside the bookcase of holy objects, because it too was a symbol, a wand of invisible healing, an icon of the wound where the light came in.